It had been a long, tense wait in the church community. For years, whispers had floated through hallways, social media posts, and private conversations, rumors about hidden agendas, disagreements, and unspoken conflicts between two of the most prominent figures in the network, Bishop Brandon Porter and Bishop J. Drew Sheared. To the public, they were respected leaders, but behind closed doors, their relationship had frayed over time. People wondered, silently and aloud, who could be trusted and who had motives that were not as pure as they seemed. Today, the air was thick with anticipation, because finally, Bishop Brandon Porter was ready to speak, and he had promised to do it live. Brandon's journey to this moment had not been easy. For months, he had quietly gathered pieces of information, carefully reviewing documents, messages, and records. He wasn't trying to attack anyone personally, but he wanted to bring transparency to a community that deserved truth. He had spent countless nights preparing, making sure that when the moment came, every word, every fact, and every claim would be delivered with clarity and professionalism. The community sensed something big was coming. Comments on social media hinted at a storm brewing. People speculated about what might happen if Brandon finally revealed what he had uncovered. When the live session began, the tension was immediately palpable. Brandon spoke calmly at first, his tone measured but firm, acknowledging the audience and setting the stage for what was about to unfold. He introduced the topic delicately, hinting at conflicts that had long been ignored or dismissed. Then, piece by piece, he revealed what he had learned. Messages that contradicted public statements, decisions that had affected the community in ways many didn't understand, and private communications that raised questions about leadership choices. Each revelation was presented clearly, and with each point, the tension in the virtual room seemed to grow. People watching felt like they were witnessing a private truth being unveiled before their eyes. Bishop J. Drew Sheared's reaction was visible, even through the screen. He tried to maintain composure, responding with carefully chosen words, yet subtle signs, hesitations, a slight tightening of expression, betrayed his discomfort. Brandon remained calm throughout, never raising his voice, but his eyes carried determination. The contrast was striking. One leader steady in truth, the other visibly shaken under scrutiny. The community watching could feel the weight of every word, the authenticity in Brandon's delivery, and the seriousness of the claims being made. Then came the climax. Brandon presented the final piece of evidence, a statement or action that directly contradicted J. Drew's public persona. It was a moment that left viewers silent for a beat, processing what they had just heard. The energy in the chat exploded with reactions, shock, disbelief, and support for Brandon's courage. In that moment, the truth seemed undeniable, and the courage to speak it gave Brandon a new level of respect and authority among his followers. It was a turning point, not just for the leaders involved, but for the community itself, which had longed for clarity and honesty. The fallout was immediate. Messages flooded social media, news outlets picked up the story, and discussions erupted across church communities. Brandon's reputation soared as someone who had acted with integrity, while J. Drew faced increased scrutiny and questions about accountability. Yet the story didn't end there. There were hints that this confrontation might be just the beginning. Will reconciliation be possible, or will tensions escalate further? The community watched, eager for the next chapter, aware that change had begun, but uncertain how far it would go. In the end, the lesson was clear. Speaking the truth takes courage, and when done with integrity, it can shift the course of entire communities. Brandon Porter's live revelation was more than a confrontation. It was a moment that reminded everyone of the power of honesty, transparency, and leadership guided by principle. And as the audience reflected on what they had witnessed, one thought lingered in everyone's mind. Sometimes, the truth is the most powerful force of all. Bishop Brandon, despite the chaos, remained grounded. He reached out to those who had supported him, offering words of reassurance, explaining that his goal was never to humiliate, but to clarify. Brandon understood the delicate balance of leadership, how one revelation could inspire hope, but also create divisions if not handled with care. His calm demeanor and thoughtful approach earned him even more respect. People began to see him not just as a bold figure confronting wrongdoing, but as a leader who acted with purpose and integrity, someone willing to risk personal criticism for the greater good of transparency. Meanwhile, J. Drew Sheared faced an internal struggle that no one could see but everyone sensed. He had spent years building a reputation, cultivating influence, and earning respect in the community. Yet the live exposure challenged not only his authority, but also his personal beliefs about leadership and accountability. Some followers stood by him, believing in his intentions, while others turned away, unsure of what to trust anymore. It was a defining moment for him, forcing self-reflection and difficult choices. Could he rebuild trust? Would he confront his own mistakes publicly, or would he retreat and hope the storm would pass? These questions lingered in the air, leaving the community anxious and curious about the next chapter. As the days passed, the story evolved. Media coverage, social media debates, and private conversations kept the momentum alive. Brandon continued to engage with the community, sharing insights and reflections on the importance of honesty and ethical leadership. He, Signs, emphasized that exposing truth wasn't about personal gain, but about accountability. His words resonated with many, reinforcing a growing belief that integrity matters more than image. On the other hand, J. Drew's silence, punctuated by occasional statements that seemed defensive or vague, only fueled speculation. Every move he made was scrutinized, every message analyzed, and every public appearance compared to the revelations from the live session. By the end of the week, it became clear that something significant had shifted. The dynamics of leadership in the community had changed, and people were paying attention like never before. Brandon Porter's bold actions had ignited discussions on transparency, trust, and responsibility, and even those who disagreed with his approach had to acknowledge the courage it took to confront difficult truths publicly. Meanwhile, J. Drew Sheared faced a reckoning, not just from the community, but from within himself, as the consequences of the exposure challenged him to rethink his path forward. It was a story still unfolding, a tale of conflict, courage, and the complex nature of leadership that had everyone talking, questioning, and watching closely. The day of the aftermath felt heavier than the live session itself. The church community, online and offline, was buzzing, dissecting every word, every gesture, and every subtle nuance from the exposure. Bishop Brandon Porter's revelations had struck a nerve. People who had long admired Bishop J. Drew Sheared were now questioning their trust, feeling torn between loyalty and the undeniable evidence of contradictions in his actions. Conversations in community groups, family gatherings, and social media threads were filled with heated debates. Everyone had an opinion, and no one could ignore the ripple effect Brandon's courage had unleashed. Bishop Brandon, meanwhile, handled the aftermath with a remarkable balance of calmness and decisiveness. He continued to reach out, not to inflame tensions, but to explain his intentions clearly. He emphasized that transparency was essential for leadership to remain genuine and accountable. Brandon's approach resonated deeply, as people saw his honesty not as a weapon, but as a tool for change. Even those who initially felt conflicted began to respect the bravery it took to expose difficult truths in such a public forum. His actions reinforced a critical lesson. Leadership is not about maintaining appearances, but about standing firm in the truth, even when it risks personal and professional backlash. On the other side, Bishop J. Drew Sheared faced intense scrutiny. Each statement he made, each action he took, was examined for authenticity. He was challenged to respond not just publicly, but personally, confronting the consequences of choices that had remained hidden for too long. Some of his followers still supported him, defending past decisions as misunderstandings or misinterpretations, but the overall tone of the community had shifted. People were no longer willing to accept surface-level explanations. The exposure forced J. Drew to reflect on the gap between perception and reality, leadership and accountability, and the fine line that separates respect earned from respect assumed. The emotional weight of the story reached every corner of the community. Families, congregations, and leaders wrestled with the implications of what they had witnessed. Brandon's courage became a benchmark for honesty, inspiring discussions about integrity, responsibility, and the true meaning of leadership. Meanwhile, J. Drew's struggle symbolized a universal challenge. How does one regain trust once it has been questioned? And is it possible to rebuild credibility after public doubt has taken hold? The tension lingered, creating a sense of anticipation and curiosity that kept everyone engaged. It was more than a personal conflict. It had become a story about truth, courage, and the consequences of choices, echoing far beyond the individuals involved. By the end of the week, it was clear that the dynamics of leadership had shifted. Bishop Brandon Porter emerged as a figure of accountability and honesty, not only admired for his bravery, but also seen as a symbol of what ethical leadership could look like in a community often silenced by appearances. Bishop J. Drew Sheared, faced with the reality of public scrutiny and self-reflection, was forced to confront his path forward, knowing that redemption, if possible, would require more than words. It would require consistent, visible action. The story had reached a turning point, leaving the community in suspense, reflecting on the importance of transparency and waiting for the next chapter in a drama that felt both real and profoundly human. As the dust began to settle from the dramatic live session, the church community found itself reflecting on the events that had unfolded. Bishop Brandon Porter's courage to speak the truth had left a lasting impression, not just on those directly involved, but on everyone who witnessed it. His calm, professional, and unwavering approach became a benchmark for honesty and integrity. People began to understand that leadership is not just about influence or charisma. It is about accountability, transparency, and the willingness to face difficult truths. Brandon's actions reminded everyone that sometimes doing what is right requires patience, preparation, and immense courage, even when the outcome is uncertain. Meanwhile, Bishop J. Drew Sheared had entered a period of self-reflection. The exposure forced him to confront choices he had long avoided and to recognize the impact of his actions on the community. While some of his followers remained loyal, others became cautious, seeking evidence of genuine change before fully trusting him again. This tension highlighted a universal truth. Trust, once shaken, is not easily restored. The story emphasized that leadership is not only measured by success or popularity, but by the ability to act responsibly, face accountability, and learn from mistakes. The broader community began to engage in deeper conversations about honesty, integrity, and the responsibility of those in positions of authority. Families, congregations, and leaders discussed the importance of transparency, the dangers of unchecked power, and the courage required to confront uncomfortable realities. Brandon's example inspired many to speak up in their own lives, to question decisions, and to value truth over appearances. The story, though fictional, carried a profound message about courage and ethical leadership, resonating far beyond the church setting. In the end, the events surrounding the live exposure became more than a confrontation between two leaders. It became a lesson in integrity, the strength of character, and the power of truth. Bishop Brandon Porter's bravery illuminated the importance of holding people accountable while maintaining dignity, and Bishop J. Drew Sheared's struggle served as a reminder that even the most respected figures are human, subject to error and scrutiny. The community was left with a sense of reflection, understanding that change begins with transparency, and that the courage to speak up can transform not only individuals, but entire communities. The story concluded, leaving viewers with a lingering thought. Truth may challenge comfort, but it ultimately shapes trust, respect, and lasting legacy.